1. All right, welcome back. This is Edward Dalcour. I'm with my friend, apologist, evangelist, Luis Reyes. It was at your church, right, that we had that debate with Stephen Ritchie, that I did that debate with Steve. That was your church.
Yeah, it was a church I used to go to. It's a little church right here in Pico Rivera. And
Right,
that's where you did your debate with
Ritchie.
Stephen Ritchie. Yeah, that was interesting.
It's funny, people say rest in peace. Someone
Yeah.
commented they said I misrepresented Ritchie when I said, I quoted, because I was telling my opponent that I was debating that guy, John. I said, well, you believe like Stephen Ritchie that there's two persons in the body of Christ. That's flat out Nestorianism. And someone posted that Stephen never said that. I took him out of context. No, that was Stephen's. He was confident in that. That was his main argument, that there's two persons, the Father and the Son, inside the body of Jesus. Unbelievable. And that you heard it at your church.
Yeah, I'm like, wow, that's straight out Nestorianism.
Luis,
Because they speak out of both sides of their mouth. That's the problem.
yeah, because they don't have. It's always a debate between the exegesis of Scripture and their personal theology. As you've seen with most debates, oneness people do not like to interact exegetically. Certainly, that last debate I had, which was painful, I wasn't expecting them to be that ill-equipped exegetically, but they were. And I wasn't expecting them to say the Father has blood and the Father was on that cross and that demons have blood, But what do? You're talking about unregenerate people, about a very bizarre system called Oneness Pentecostalism or Oneness theology or modalism, monarchianism. I mean, there's different names. Fundamentally, they all believe that God is Unitarian, and the name of that Unitarian God is Jesus.
Yeah.
All right. You have a book. We mentioned it in part 1. You have a book that's coming out. And what was the title again?
Is Jesus the person of the Son of God to Oneness Pentecostals?
Is Jesus the person of the Son of God?
Son
And
of God.
we spent a lot of time defining that title and that concept because briefly, what do they believe about the Son of God?
Well, that's a big
And why did you
question.
title your book that?
Okay, because as we saw, Son of God to them means something else. Son of God to them means two things. Means simply the flesh of Jesus, and it also means the person of the Father manifested in that flesh of Jesus. That's what Son of God means to them. Okay, so considering that, let's say that's true. Where is the person of the Son of God? Is there a person of the Son of God? And at what point was Jesus the person of the Son of God? And when we really look into this issue, we see that they don't have a person of the Son of God. They have a person of a Father in the flesh of something they call the Son of God. But that is not a person. Some have said he is a person, but they end up with Nestorianism. So then they start backtracking. And they say, well, he's the person of the Father as the person of the Son. Then he's not the person of the Son. I mentioned in the previous recording, if I am the person of Luis and I am going to act as the person of Spider-Man, ontologically, I am not really the person of Spider-Man. I'm still the person of Luis. There is no actual person of Spider-Man. It's an actor.
It's a mode.
It's a mode. So in the same way, Oneness Pentecostals do not have a person of the Son of God. So how can they have an intimate communion with the person of the Son of God, with the Jesus who is a person of the Son of God? They can't, because he's not a person.
And we were talking about this before. There's, I believe, David Bernard, at least he did, rejects the idea that God is a person, even though they believe in a unipersonal deity, like Muslims or Jehovah's Witnesses. Some don't like that word person. Others do, like the old article, 60 Questions on the Godhead, that was published by the UPCI. One of the questions was, and in my book, Definitive Look at Oneness Theology, Defense of the Trinity, which you can get on my website, christiandefense.org, I quoted that question: is is God one person? I believe it reads like that, and the answer, then they self-answer it, yes, in the person of Jesus Christ. So Jesus is the one person deity. And fundamentally, Muslims and Oneness Pentecostals believe in the same thing. Jehovah's Witnesses, Christadelphians, they all believe that God is unipersonal, even though in the Old Testament, and it's interesting how they get out of all the plurals. They don't like when I bring up all the plurals, plural adjectives, verbs, prepositions that are all used of the one Yahweh, because we find in the Old Testament the concept of monotheistic Trinitarianism. We find singular words because God is one being, but we also find plural words. And don't even try to use a plural of majesty, something that was not used in the Old Testament nor the New Testament. Hundreds of years later, and I would also challenge someone, show me the exact reference where a plural of majesty, even after that, is actually used. No king was used the plural of majesty. Why can't I just allow the text to read for itself? Why can't I allow Genesis 19:24 when I read the culmination of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, where we read that Moses, and this is Moses speaking, Yahweh rained on Sodom and Gomorrah, brimstone and fire from Yahweh, min, the prepositions used, out from heaven, out from heaven. Why can't I just allow that reading? Why can't I allow all the readings that show Jesus is the Son of the Father? 2 John 1:3. Jesus Christ, he's the Son of the Father. Why
Yeah,
can't I just allow that to
that's
stand?
yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. And if
Your
I,
book
that
is
that
I was going to say your book is a very necessary book. I think all books on Oneness Pentecostalism, but you're focusing on the concept of their view of
person,
the person of Son, not only in refutation, but also you're providing a positive affirmation of all the from Genesis to Revelation. Yes, in the Old Testament, we see the Huophanies or the Son appearances, the person of the Son, who, interesting, the angel of the Lord, and we know that the angel of the Lord, if you look at all the references, he identified himself as Yahweh. The recipients identified him as Yahweh. I like Hagar in Genesis 16. In the Septuagint, she says, you, the angel of the Lord, are Ha Tha'os, the God who sees all. And of course, he claimed that he was Yahweh and the God of the fathers to Moses. Anyways, all through the Old Testament, we see the angel of the Lord identifying himself, the person of the angel of the Lord identifying himself as Yahweh. Then in places like Zechariah 1:12, the angel of the Lord prays to Yahweh,
Mhm.
only from a context of monotheistic Trinitarianism would this be biblically valid? So you give a positive affirmation and a refutation. What do you think? And we'll just the rest of the time here, we will just I think we'll just go look at some of the passages that most there's so many of them, but that clearly, I should say clearly, present the Son of God as a person, a distinct person, not just a person, but a distinct person. And we're talking about the Son, a distinct person. And what I wanted to do before we get into those passages, and I remember in I think most of my debates, I communicate the stats. I declare the stats in the New Testament. For instance, um, about 44 or 45 times, Jesus proclaimed that God was his Father. There's about 17 references where Jesus prays to God, the Father. But check this out, and I mentioned it in my last debate. There was all I heard was crickets. Nobody responded to it. Over 200 times, Jesus is explicitly referred to as Son, and never once was he called by himself or his followers Father. He was never called Father, nor did he call himself Father. Don't use John 14:11. It's a waste of good suffering to use John 14:11. Peter, or to Philip, he wasn't saying, I am the Father. He said, he said, I'm the representation of the Father, like he said in verse 6. I'm the way, the truth, and the life. Nobody comes to the Father. Notice the different prepositions,
yeah,
except through me, right? And 200 times he's called Son, never the Father. And over 200 times in the gospel, the Father is referred to by Jesus as someone else, a distinct person, over 200 times. 50 times, how about this? 50 times in the gospel. 50 times the Father and Jesus, the Son, are explicitly distinct in the same passage. We also see this in Daniel chapter 7, in the same passage. Almost 180 times, 189 times in the Gospels, Jesus refers to the Father as my Father, your Father, or the Father. And at no time does he say, how about this? Not one time does Jesus say, my son, as if my son was somebody else. Certainly, if he was the Father, you would see some
Yeah.
kind of reference of that, you know.
Yeah. In
Um,
in uh, i- in linguistics, what you're pointing out is known as an idiolect. An idiolect
Explain.
is the unique way every person speaks. Every person has their own unique way of speaking. All the authors of the Bible have their own idiolect. Jesus has his own idiolect. Now, let me give you an example of the idiolect of the Son of God, the person of the Son of God. For example, he says, "Truly, truly, I say to you." That's one phrase that he says. But have we ever heard the Father say that or something like that? I can't think of any examples. Or the Father says, "This is my Son." But as you're mentioning, Jesus never said, "This is my Son."
No, not
So,
one
and,
time
and I'm sure there's a lot of more examples. I'm in my book.
anymore.
I'm listing some of them, but distinction of idiolect implies distinction of person. Also, when you mention the data, the two, that is a relational property. You need two objects in order to have that relational property of going from one thing to something else. That also shows distinction right there, just as a prostantheon does as well. Can I mention something real quick? You mentioned David Bernard, and I heard David Bernard one time say that God was a person. I actually have him recorded in one of his debates with, I think it was a guy named Skip something.
Flipped.
He flipped. And there's a brother, a dear brother by the name of Mike LaTorre, and you know him
Oh
because
yeah,
he's the one
yeah,
that
yeah,
introduced me to you.
yeah.
Mike LaTorre is a Puerto Rican brother on the East Coast, and man, he's a hardcore apologist. He's debating. We share a lot of ideas, kind of like you. You know, he's my right hand over there, and he's helping me out a lot. And well, Mike LaTorre did a debate on Spanish radio by himself with two Oneness Pentecostals live, and the issue was Genesis 1:26, the verse that you mentioned. These guys these guys had no response for this. I mean, for those of you guys that are Spanish speakers, you need to see it. I think it's over 100,000 views already. Mike did phenomenal in this debate, and it just wow, it just these guys were challenging people on the radio. There's no Trinitarian out there that can respond. There's no Trin, and Mike was driving home one day, and he said, "You know what? It's time for me to call." He calls up, he sets up the debate, he goes over there, and the debate's outstanding. And so Mike and I did a video on the issue of personhood and person with Oneness Pentecostals. And we showed how David Bernard flipped from one side to the other. So this is what's happening in the Spanish world. Half of the people say God is not a person, and the other half say he is a person. So there's a conflict right there. Once they admitted that God is a person, everything fell apart because now we started asking about the person of the Son, and it just all crumbled. So now you have some that are going back to, oh no, well, God is not a person. You know that we better not go that route because we know what's ahead in that road. So there's, and I suspect this is going to happen here in the English world too.
Um, I think that's the weakest. I've always mentioned the weakest part of oneness theology is the pre-existence of the person of the Son. That is the weakest.
Yeah.
And so for us, that translates to us. Use it. Show the passages where the Son pre-exists. The Son pre-exists distinct from the Father. Um, you know, I think John 1:1 is still a standard text to go to because it's simple. And I always start off by saying I don't even need to exegete it because the English or recognized translation speaks for itself. In the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. Why do I have to pretext this beautiful passage in light of the content from verses 1 through 18, which defines the Word as a person in verse 3. He's the agent of creation in verse 4. In him was life. In verse 6 and 7, John the Baptist was a witness, right, to the word, not to a plan, not to a mode, but to a person, right? He testified
Mm-hmm.
to a person. He
Mm-hmm.
affirmed a person, interacted with a person. And verse 10, he's the agent of the creation. Verse 14, he became flesh. And then verse 18 that we talked about, no one has ever seen God the Father. The monogenes theos, the unique God who is always, articulate participle there, who is always at the Father's kolpos, bosom, intimate closeness. And as we mentioned before, of all the places it's used, except in Acts 27, where it
Mm-hmm.
denotes a bay, every single time
Yeah.
it denotes, used 6 times in the New Testament, aside from Acts, it denotes a closeness of intimacy of distinct persons, whether it's John at the breast of Jesus, whether it's Abraham's bosom, or John, or in Luke 6, it always denotes intimacy of distinct persons, not a person and a plan. There's no example in the New Testament Greek or in the Septuagint. But in saying that, why do I have to even exegete that passage? Does not the plain meaning speak for itself
Yeah.
in John 1 1?
It's by pure presupposition.
Yeah.
And that verse that you're citing, just remember that John the Baptist says, "This is he of whom I spoke that was before me."
Yeah,
Again,
yeah.
supporting the idea that who was before him? What do you mean? He wasn't born before you know what I'm saying? So that's also implying the pre-existence of the Son of God. I believe it's verse 21. I don't remember. But the
No,
whole
the
context,
content tells us that the word is a person.
yeah. Let me also address an argument that they raise all the time that regarding person. They say, "Well, show me right there, Luis. Show me where the word person. Where does it say he's a person?" Well, that's another fallacy because you're presupposing that the word person has to show up in order for the referent to ontologically be a person. So let me give you an example. We have the 2 thieves on the cross. Yeah. Does it say there that they were persons? Is the word person used there? No. Were they persons? Well, obviously, they got to say they're persons. Yeah. Well, we know that by inference and by rational deduction. Yeah. Okay, they're persons. So the word person doesn't have to appear. So we're done with that argument. Don't even bring that up again. That was silly. And we get back to discussing the issue. You know.
Do you ever it's interesting because even Jehovah's Witnesses have an argument explaining why the devil's a person. He talks. And in scripture, he
Yeah.
intelligently communicates. That's one mark of a person. Not that you have to talk. You can be in a coma and still be a person. But they
Mhm.
use that argument to show that the devil is a person, yet they won't apply it to the Holy Spirit. When the Holy Spirit speaks, issues commands, has a will, he gives wills, he gives gifts according to his own will. You can grieve him. So, all
Yeah.
three persons, the same evidence is used to show that all three um, persons are self-aware subjects. If you don't like the person, okay, self-aware subjects, egos,
Hmm.
whatever you.
Hmm.
And I mentioned there's several different words in Greek that can be translated as person. That's
Hmm.
why I always ask, well, what would person look like? Because what would a Greek word be that is translated person? They don't know. Hebrews 1:3 in the King James, right? It says, uh, who he is a very impress, right? The very impress of the person of him or of his
Yeah.
person. It translates hypostasios as person. I mean, there's
Hmm.
many words that can be translated as person, but you made a good point. It doesn't say the thieves are a person, but they're self-aware subjects, aware of their
Yeah.
own existence. But they're
Well, I mean, you could,
self-aware subjects.
yeah, look at Moses, look at Daniel, whoever, look at whoever. Where does it say they were persons? It doesn't say they were
Right.
persons. The word is not used there. They'll use that text in Hebrew to say, "Oh, see, it says person, not persons. If he's a Trinity, then why aren't the other persons mentioned?" The arguments from silence. If I mention to you my son, you can't conclude that I only have one son. I could have 2 sons. I just mentioned one. Doesn't mean just because I mentioned one doesn't mean I don't have two or a daughter.
Right.
There's a lot of logical fallacies involved with the reasoning of Oneness Pentecostals. We see that all the time.
And even objective stats like the ones I just quoted, which they don't. There was nothing. All I heard was crickets. There was no response in any of the debates that I do of those. Where is Jesus called son or called father? Where did he claim he was father? Where did anyone call him father? Actually, the converse is true in Hebrews chapter 1, where the Father addresses him as son, not as himself, but as son, who is the creator of all things. In verse 10, the Father actually directly addresses the Son, because in verse 8 it says about the Son, he, the Father, says. But in verse 10, he addresses the Son as kuriai, the vocative of the word kurios. Vocative case is a case of direct address. It's only used, except one metaphorical usage, it's only used of persons, and they're distinct. When you see the vocative, there's no, and note this, there's no example in the Septuagint nor in the New Testament Greek where the vocative, where we find a first person vocative, where a first person vocative would be where the subject directly addresses himself. There's no example, because the
Yeah.
Bible is not oneness. It's monotheistic Trinitarian, to be sure.
Yeah. I haven't heard them argue that a person can refer to himself in the second person, like you. Oh, good job, Luis. You really did well this day, or something like that. I
There's
mean,
no
I've heard all.
example of such a
Yeah,
vocative,
yeah. I haven't seen any of that. So that was a good point that you made up in your debate. That was a great point.
and the other
I've never seen
stat.
evidence of that.
Yeah, and the other stat, same with the aorist imperative, and we'll see when we talk about John 17:5, the aorist imperative is used. The stresses urgency of a command. It's never used where a subject, is commanding himself, but that's what we find in John 17:5. In John 1:1, we find that phrase pros ton theon, with the God. That's how it literally reads, with the God. It's used 20 times in the New Testament, all but in Romans 15:17, Hebrews 2:17, and Hebrews 5:1, where the neuter article is before the phrase prostantheon. Now, with the neuter article, how would that translate?
That would translate as the things that pertain to God, or something along those lines.
So why can't I apply that, make an argument that in John 1:1b, that's talking about a thing or not a person was with God?
Because the neuter article is not present in the second clause of John 1:1.
The
It's
imperfect is,
simply not
right?
the same. Yeah, it's simply not the same.
So
You
aside
may,
from yeah, so aside from where the neuter's used, it's used 20 times, but aside from where the three places where the neuter, which clearly has a meaning concerning or regarding the things of God, every single time it's used, it denotes person or persons distinct from God every single time. And you're going to tell me this is the exception?
yeah,
It's only
I know
applied to
it.
persons.
It's amazing. In my debate that I had with this Oneness Pentecostal, that's one of my arguments. I don't know if you could see it right here. Let me see. But I list all those examples that you're talking about. I don't know if you could see it or not, but sorry about that. But so I have all the verses there. I found some. I even checked the Septuagint, and I told there's only 6 examples out of those 70 times that I've looked up. I looked everywhere in the Old Testament, in the New Testament, and yeah, I cited Hebrews 2:17, Hebrews 5:1, Romans 15:17. I can't remember exactly what it is, but I have it in here. Exodus 4:16 in the Septuagint, and Exodus 18:19, and Deuteronomy 31:27. And none of those are the only possible ones that may support what they're saying. But then I said, but look at this, look at all these other texts, look at all these passages that I found here over 70 times, including the Septuagint, where there's always a distinction. So that's another thing. Even if
Always.
they say that he's
Yeah.
not, even if they say in the New Testament, they're persons, but let's say even if they're not persons, my argument was there's always a distinction between the thing that is between the referent and the referent that is with the God. There's always a distinction of identity. He's never the same person. Never.
He's never the same person. Right.
Never. So
Never,
that's a
never.
powerful
Yeah.
argument. But it's interesting how you were saying how First John clarifies it. And that's what the accusative case, prostantheon. And in First John, it says proston patera. with the
Father.
Father.
It's the
He's
same prepositional
identified.
phrase. Yeah.
Yes.
Pastan. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same thing. And he was with the Father. What we
It's
have
interesting.
seen, what we have
And
heard
touched.
and touched. Look at all the senses. He's telling you, look, we saw him, we heard him, we touched. I mean, I mean, that's empirical right there, right?
And
Empirical
the
evidence.
same imperfect verb is used, was with the Father, the word of life. John's given a
Yes.
commentary in First
Yeah.
John chapter 1, verses 1
Yeah.
and 2, to the Gospel of John, verses 1, 1. John sees the word as a person who he touched, who he saw, who he was at the kolpos, he leaned on
Yeah.
his breast. This is a
Yeah.
person. And you radically have to pretext, you got to be unregenerated not to see these things. Only
Yeah.
the ones of God hear the words of God, Jesus said in John 8:47. The Lord's Prayer was very, I honestly, I didn't know they would be this bad in terms of that guy and some other oneness, perhaps, but the guy I debated, John, I forgot his last name. It was so bad, where he said the Father is the speaker of John 17:5, of John 17:5. Um, let me, can I share the screen here? Well, I'll share the screen, but I'm
Hmm.
sorry, I didn't transliterate it. Um, could you see my cursor right here?
Yes, I could see it.
Okay. I'll transliterate it.
Hmm.
It's a simple path. This is the Lord's Prayer. And it's interesting that, again, you just allow this verse to this entire prayer to read for itself, and you see two persons. Two persons. In John 17, Jesus says the Father loves him. How does anything but a person love Jesus? And he's talking about his Father. Um, this is Kai, and now I highlighted the words of exegetical significance.
Hmm.
Doxason, which is, what is that word?
Glorify.
And it's not, the verb is actually in the aorist imperative. In the aorist imperative. An aorist imperative in Greek is the strongest way to command. Again, there's no example. It would be absurd, where someone commands themselves. It's like me saying,
See
"See,
that
get out of
that's a
this
good point.
room."
Yeah,
And
that's a good
it's not
point.
it's not any old command, and it's used, I think, 2 or 3 times of the Son to the Father. Um, the strongest way to make a command, and this we find now, this doesn't contradict our theology. It does. If you're a Trinitarian, we have no problem with the idea of, because they're co-equal, the Son commanding the Father, because this is how it's normally used, to issue a urgent command. Now, Father, or glorify me. Notice the shift of pronouns. Glorify
Hmm.
me. And also, again, it's only used, the aorist imperative, like the vocative, of distinct persons or something. I think in one reference, I think the aorist imperative is used where Jesus says, say to this mountain, be cast away. But when persons are in view, it's always distinct
Hmm.
persons here.
Hmm.
Glorify ma in Greek, me, right here, su in English, su, you.
Sue.
Glorify me, you, Father. Father's in the vocative case here.
Pater.
Pater, vocative case. No reference of first person vocatives in the Bible where someone addresses their own self. Vocative is a case of direct address. So glorify me, you, Father, and here we go. Again, I apologize that I didn't transliterate it. Parasa auto. You have the preposition para, and then you have a dative, and we'll talk about the dative. You have the prepositional phrase para sa auto, and then para soy, with you. This is together with yourself, and this is
Hmm.
with you.
Hmm.
Twice, the para with the dative. Twice you
Hmm.
have that. Just put that aside for a second. Together with yourself, it's shared here. The glory that I shared, a con, imperfect, as Vincent said, he always possessed this shared glory. No one else possesses shared glory. 42:8 of Isaiah. I don't share my glory with another. Only the persons of the Trinity share glory. The glory, the imperfect implies, shows that he had this glory and it was a shared glory. The glory that I shared with you, parasoi, and look at this phrase right here. It's a dual article, very interesting. Pra, right here, which means before, huton, the world, then you have the infinitive, was. So we have glorify me now, Father, you, Father, not myself, but you, Father, together with yourself, with the glory I shared, ekon, shared with you, pratuton kosmon anai, before the world was, with you. Now, you know what their argument was? No exegetical response, no linguistic comments. Their article was simply this, their argument of these oneness guys. Yeah, that's the Father speaking. What's the biggest problem there, Luis, by
Well,
asserting this is the Father speaking?
there's a lot of problems. You mentioned the imperative. There's no example that I know of where a person commands himself. I've never seen that. I don't know if you have, Ed, where a person commands himself. I haven't seen
Bible.
that. And also he was with, it says with you.
Problem
The
with the
personal,
dative.
yeah.
Yeah. What's the grammatical linguistic significance of pra with the dative?
That means he's with him.
Yeah.
There's a
Together
reference that,
side by side. This is
yeah, there's a relation there. There's a relation between two somethings. You
because that's
cannot
how
be,
it's
yeah,
used.
yes, that's how it's used. So that's a big problem for them. So how can this guy say that he was, what is he saying? That he was with himself? Is that what he's saying?
Pra with the dative, and any standard grammar will show this, and you have some really good ones behind you. That pra with the dative has the sense of side by side in the association.
Side by side.
And if you look at pra with the dative in John's literature, it appears 10 times. This prepositional phrase, pra with the dative, appears 10 times in John's literature. Every single time in John, it involves person or persons who were literally not in the mind or in someone's thought, but literally side by side or in the company with someone or something else every single time. My favorite reference with para with the dative is John 14:23, where Jesus, the Son, answered the same person who said, when you see me, you see the Father. That's when his people like to use that out of
Yeah.
context, of course. They just rip it out of the verse. But notice verse 23 of John 14. Jesus said, if anyone loves me, he will keep my word, and my Father, not me and me, but my Father will love him. So if anyone loves me, he'll keep my word. And over here, a different person, the Father, a distinct person, the Father will love him. Then listen to this, first person plural, we will come to him and we will make our abode, para auto. You have the prepositional phrase, but two future indicatives, in fact, of poieo. Interesting, Luis, Genesis 1:26 has the same plural of the base verb poieo. In Genesis 1:26, let us make, comes from the same word, the same plural, right? The same term, from the same verb. How does Jesus use two future plural indicative verbs if he's the same person as the Father? We will come, we will make. No,
it doesn't make any sense.
No, you can't.
Yeah, just and even if for people that don't know any Greek, I mean, just reading it in English, the glory I had with you. Why would he say with you if he's the same person?
There's no examples of para with the dative that's used of a person with himself. There's no examples. There's no examples of any lexical source that applies an in the mind definition to the pra with the dative, all of them agree with me. Scholarship's on my
It's
side.
there.
They're on our side, not on theirs. And just say it means anything. I mean, the Father is the speaker is probably the worst view. They
Yeah,
said
I was
that
just
about John 6:38 as well.
yeah, I was just thinking about that. That's what this guy said, right? That this was the Father here speaking
Speaking, yeah,
to
yeah.
and now, Father, glorify me, myself, with thyself, who is me, with the glory that I had with you, which is really with me before the world. It just doesn't make any sense. It's making you process more information, which to me is telling me that it's not the relevant interpretation. It's just the mental processing to try to understand, according to them, that it's the same person talking to himself is causing way too much mental effort to process this, which tells me that's not the interpretation. That's not the correct interpretation.
No, it can't. I mean, the guy ran from sin to, I mean, he didn't want to talk it exegetically. Now the only reason why that I even commented on any exegetical nuts and bolts is because they couldn't accept the just plain English translation. They couldn't accept it. And another issue on the vocative of father,
Amazing.
patir, it's used about 24, 25 times, right? I think there's like two variants in the Greek New Testament. It's always distinct persons, never modes addressing the Father. It's always persons,
Yes.
persons,
Yes.
every single time.
That they have no basis for what they're saying. This is just simply the gentleman that you were debating. They were just grasping at straws. As a matter of fact, it really appeared to me that they didn't even understand what you were saying.
No, they
And
did. I didn't know they were that bad, or I probably would have bowed out. I probably would have not wanted to do it. I didn't think they were that bad.
yeah, I've had debates like that, and the one that I did with this one gentleman in Spanish is one of them. He was going all over the place, and I said, "Look, we had an agreement. You're going to stay with the subject." With and this was the title of that debate was this: Is Jesus Christ a person of the Son of God after the incarnation, not before the incarnation, after? Well, he was all over the place talking about the Trinity and this. I said, you're violating the rules. Here they are. Here are the rules. And if you keep doing this, I'm going to terminate the debate and I'm going to publish this in a book. So what does he do in the next commentary? Going to stay with the subject. I said, I'm done. I'm not going to waste any more time, but it's going to come out like that. You know what I'm saying? So, there's I studied something called relevance theory, which is a pragmatic way of interpreting things. I wrote a paper on this, actually two papers. They're not published, but I presented them at an SBL international conference, one in Singapore and one in Scotland. And it has to do with methods of interpretation with text or any kind of linguistic expression and how human communication works. One of the things of relevance theory is if the interpretation is causing you too much mental effort and the work that you put in is not giving you these contextual effects that show it's a correct interpretation, then it's not the correct interpretation. One example is remember that text from the Jehovah's Witnesses, truly, truly I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise.
Yeah.
That's one of them. That's an example where I always wanted to write a paper on that.
Word of faith people, I think, was it Kenneth Hagin? I think all the people under Hagin, they, because they believe that Jesus went to hell to atone. And Joyce Meyer says in her book, the most important decision you're ever going to make in her book, one of the things you have to believe to be saved is that Jesus went to hell and got beat up by the demons. It's crazy.
Gosh, yeah.
Well, they will tell us, what the Greek really says and how it's mispunctuated. So they use the same argument as Jehovah's Witnesses. So
that's interesting.
He's saying today, I'm telling you that someday you'll be with me in paradise.
Yeah. Yeah. So if the processing effort that you're putting in is not giving you the overall results, if it's too much work and the reward is not enough, then it's not the relevant interpretation. I have a paper on this, and it's very difficult to explain, and it's been a while since I actually studied this, but I'll send it to you. In this debate, actually have a couple of pages where I go over that, It's kind of hard to explain. The
You
point
know,
is, if you're working too hard to try to interpret it, and it's not giving you any satisfactory results, then that's not the correct interpretation.
that's very interesting because again, it comes down to most of Scripture. We seek the plain meaning because most of it has a plain meaning. But if you're a oneness advocate or Jehovah's Witness, you cannot accept the plain meaning. The great God and Savior, Jesus Christ. No, here's why, because there's a pronoun here, or my Lord and my God, or the God of me, the Lord of me and God of me. No, because Thomas was just happy and excited. You just can't accept a plain meaning.
Yeah.
Jesus is the Son of the Father, First John um or Second John 1:3. Let's do one more verse. And I know we
Okay.
we probably don't have time to go through the prologue of Hebrews, and there's so many in the Carmen Christi, Philippians 2:5-11 or 6-11, which completely annihilate the oneness position. But let's end with our last verse, because I remember you and I talked about this. I think we spent a lot of time talking about this, not because it's not clear. I mean, all of chapter 6, I always point this out. 8 times it says the person of the Son, or the Son came out of heaven. 8 times it says in there's 3 different phrases. So let's talk about this last verse, 6:38, and I can share it too. And I apologize if it's not transliterated, but we have to keep in mind the flowing context of the speaker. He says in 35, he's the bread of life. Well, the Father's not the bread of life. The Son says, I'm the bread of life. Whoever the ones coming to me will never, not even a possibility, go hungry. Never, never, the Greek says, not even a possibility. Whoever believes in me shall never, not even possibility, thirst. This is Son language, not Father language.
Right.
And in verse 37, he says, all that the Father gives to me. A mode can never say that. All that the Father gives to me will come to me. Dative
Yes.
pronoun there, will come to me, and everyone who comes to me, all those, I shall never, the ones who come to me, not even a possibility, the Greek says, another emphatic negative, double negative, never, not a possibility shall I cast them out. Then he says, because I've come here to do the will of the Father. And then in verse 38, he explicates why he came. And I think I just put it here.
Oops. Okay. Oh, cool. You got it. I was looking for it, but there you go. You got
Oh,
it.
so the same speaker of 37 says this in 38. And 39, it just gets worse for oneness advocates who
And,
deny
and
that this.
and that is the person of the Son of God who's speaking in 37 in the previous verses, unless they deny Jesus is the person of the Son of God, and that's
Well, that's
satanic.
what they
That's scary.
did. They said all of chapter 6. They said this because we talked about 6:38. They ran from the exegesis. They wouldn't even touch it. They don't
No.
like the plain meaning. They said this in John 17:5 is where the Father, not the Son, the Father is speaking. The Father is speaking. I'm not kidding. You've heard it.
Oh
But
yeah.
Jesus says, "For I have come down." Now, the reason why I put this here, and you know why, the
Mhm.
katababeka, this perfect indicative, is because it is significant. I have come
Absolutely.
down. Now, the Father doesn't come down, but of course, Oneness Pentecostals say the 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 Father who has blood, he came down. Jesus says, the Son, I have come down out of heaven, apetu uranu, out of heaven. Again, 8 times, and here's the phrases used. He says he comes out of heaven. Not in order that you have a hinai purpose and result clause, not in order that I should do see this word right there?
Telema.
The lema. What is that?
Will.
Will. Persons have wills. I don't think a giraffe has a will, or a mode certainly doesn't have a will.
Yeah.
In order that, I should do the will of me. Amon, this pronoun here, it's only used of persons. It's used mostly of Christ. Paul used it, I think, once. But anyone can get this information. It's only used of persons, never abstract modes or manifestation, only persons. I should, in order that I should do the will of me, or not do the will of me, but notice the word will is used twice. But the thelema, the will of the one having sent me. Now we know from the whole entire chapter that it's the Father sends the Son, but the word will is used twice. The will of me, I don't do the will of me, but the will of the Father. You know what they said in response to this? Here's their exegetical response to these things, like
Okay.
two occurrences of will. I didn't even get to the areas perfect relationship of time aspect. They said, well, yeah, the Father has two wills, just like you do. We all have two wills. The Father has two wills. How do you respond to that? This is the Father
Uh,
speaking and he has two wills.
I don't know. And I could have sworn that one gentleman started speaking about a will, which sounds like, the will that you write on in case you die. Hey, I kind of thought he went into that. I said, I must be hearing wrong. I don't know where he gets this from. Because what would this mean if the Father had two wills? I, the Father, have come down not to do my will of the Father. And if you look at a couple of verses down, it says, but to do the will of the Father of myself. So in other words, you have the same person saying, I came down not to do my will, but to do my will, which is a straight
Yeah,
contradiction. I
not
mean,
my
make up your
will,
mind.
but my will.
Yeah,
Not
make up
my
your
will,
mind.
but my will.
Do you
Yeah,
make up your
but you
mind?
heard it.
Do
That
you?
was his argument.
Yeah, that was absurd. And I think it's the verse 39 or 40 where it says, and that is the will of my Father.
Verse 39, and Jesus defines the will of his Father. He says, and this is the will of my Father. All that he has given me, I
Mm-hmm,
lose nothing but raise it up at the last day. Where
mm-hmm,
he's not going to
mm-hmm.
raise the oneness advocates because they have not been given by the Father to the Son because they don't believe in the person of the Son.
They don't.
These are this verse is for Christians.
This is a devastating verse for Oneness Pentecostals. They cannot admit that that's the person of the Son because they would have to admit his pre-existence. And I think you mentioned about the significance about the aorist participle under the main verb, the perfect.
Well, let's talk
And
about that because that's even
mhm.
more devastating.
Oh, I don't think those people were able to couldn't understand this. I mean, if he's saying he has two wills, I don't even think you're going to be able to communicate with
Hey,
this.
you know what? I couldn't even go further on that. That was so bizarre
Yeah,
that this is
that
the
was
Father speaking, and the Father has two wills, just like we have two wills. What in the world does that mean?
it, it
So
it means that he came down not to do his will, but to do his will, which is a straight contradiction of the law of non-contradiction. It's
I
absurd.
could
It doesn't
even
make
I couldn't even get
so.
into the aorist participle perfect time aspect relationship. Why don't you explain it?
Yeah,
I'll explain the words, and you can explain the time aspect. Okay, right here it says this phrase right here. I have come down is katababeka. It's a perfect indicative, a perfect past action with continuous results. Um, I came down out of heaven, and then here he wants to do the person of the Son wants to do. He says, "I'm not going to do my will, but the will of the one." And this phrase right here, having sent, pamxantos, having sent, is an aorist participle. So you have the two verbs, an aorist participle here, and then you have a perfect indicative here. I have come down and having sent. So what is the linguistic significance of this?
Okay, well, let me cite a couple of grammars here. I have a translation into Spanish, but I'm going to back translate it into English. There's three references I want to show you. It's Burton's New Testament Greek Moods and Tenses, page 365. Mounce's Basics of Biblical Greek, page 237. And Wallace Greek Grammar, page 614. Okay, so let me try to see if I could translate some of these because I translated them from English to Spanish so that I could use them in my Spanish discussions. So now I'm going to translate from Spanish to English, but the English grammars will have it.
Okay.
I'm going to read in Spanish verses. El participio auristo se usa con mayor frecuencia de una acción antecedente al tiempo de la acción del verbo principal. Burton's New Testament Greek Moods and Tenses, page 365. It says, the aorist participle is used with the majority of frequency as an action antecedent to the time of the main, to the time of the action of the principal verb. Right here, the principal verb is going to be katababeka. Another example is from Mounts. It says, el participio aoristo indica una acción que ocurre antes del tiempo del verbo principal. This says, the aorist participle indicates an action that occurs prior to the time of the principal verb. Okay, so the aorist indicates an action that occurs prior to the time of the principal verb. Okay, so we have a principal verb right there. It's katababeka. And we have the aorist. Yeah, we have the aorist down there, pempsantas. And this, Mounts is Basics of Biblical Greek, page 237. It says that the aorist participle, I don't know if you want to highlight that, indicates an action that occurs prior to the time of the principal verb. Okay. And I got two more. On page 266, he also says, mientras que el participo presente indica una acción que ocurre al mismo tiempo que el verbo principal, el participio aoristo indica generalmente una acción que ocurre antes del tiempo del verbo principal. While the present participle indicates an action that occurs simultaneously to the time of the main verb, the aorist participle indicates generally an action that occurs before the time of the principal verb. And my last one is from Wallace's Greek Grammar, page 614. El participio aoristo, por ejemplo, denota generalmente tiempo antecedente al verbo principal. The aorist participle, for example, generally denotes antecedent time prior to the main verb. Okay, all the grammars are saying this. Okay, so then we have, where do we have our aorist? You got it right there. Okay, so they're saying that
having sent.
Yes, their grammars are saying that action right there that you have highlighted antecedes the action of the main verb. Okay, so where's our main verb?
I've come down.
I have come down. Okay, so this means that the action of having been sent occurred before having descended from heaven. What are we saying here? What does that mean exegetically, brother? What do you think?
Norm, and as Wallace and all every grammar that I got my hands on say, this is just objective, normal Greek grammar. You would have to show, and I always challenge someone who would deny it. Show me a grammar who disagrees. It's saying clearly that the action of having sent, the Father sends the Son, came before he came down to earth, before the perfect. That means that this action that not in order that I should do the will of me, this action of him submitting his will to another person happened before he came to earth. Not merely in the incarnation. Clearly, this is two distinct, co-equal divine persons pre-incarnation. If you allow the normal grammar to stand, he was sent and he submitted his will to the Father and he was sent, then he came down to earth.
Yeah, he was sent
pre-incarnation.
Yeah,
this is pre-incarnation.
Yeah, he was sent before he came down. Now, I had one Oneness Pentecostal I spoke to. I think his name is Perkins. He was saying that there's another verb here, that it's implied. If I remember correctly, I don't want to misrepresent him, but no. Linguistic expressions are the strongest way you can express something. Clearly, katababeka is the principal verb in this entire text here. There's no doubt about that. So no, that was his way of trying to get around it. Mr. Perkins was trying to get around it. No, the action of having been sent, that aorist participle, occurred before the action of being sent. Now, let's suppose, because sometimes it occurs simultaneously. Let's suppose that it occurred simultaneously. The Oneness Pentecostal is still stuck, because you still have this person being sent simultaneously from heaven, which still shows his pre-existence. So there's no way out of this.
You know what I mean? The will of a person and the will of another distinct person.
There you go.
The will of having sent me, of him, and then my will. You still have two wills.
And then the worst part about it is he says, I came to do my will, but not my will. Wait a minute. Make up your mind then. I mean, are you going to... That's absurd.
How do you say this is... And that's... Look, it's interesting because I remember I knew where I was at when I asked him the significance, the grammatical significance of pra with the dative. I can tell he was like fumbling around Bible Hub. It means with, that was the
Oh yeah,
question,
hello, yeah, but there's
Yeah,
some
I
kind
know he
of
had Bible Hub or something, but yeah, this is a verse that clearly, number one, it shows that before the incarnation, there was two persons who had their distinct. I don't like separate, distinct wills. Not my will, but your will. That was before the incarnation, and it shows that the Son existed before he came to earth. And it also shows that the Son came out of heaven. In fact, as I said, 8 times in just chapter 6, you have these three phrases denoting the Son came out from heaven or from the heaven or from heaven, 8 different ways that the Son claimed he came from heaven. How else would the Son, if the Son was a distinct person, how would he claim that he came from heaven if these aren't them? If these aren't the places?
how can you send a non-existing thing? And this, it says that he was sent. The sending occurred before the descending. Now that person that is speaking there, that's got to be a person. That's Jesus
There's a
speaking.
will. Yeah.
So that's got to be the person of the Son of God speaking, unless you deny that Jesus speaking there is a person of the Son of God speaking. Okay, so he's a person of the Son of God. The person of the Son of God said that he was sent before he descended. Therefore, the person of the Son of God pre-existed. There's no way out of that. And all the
And
verses
he
that you
says, my
support
will,
that.
but your will.
Yes, that's another one. That's
So I understand the desperation when you come to, I know he hasn't, I don't, I sense what he was looking at, and as do other oneness advocates, they've never seen it before. They never had to deal with it before. So the only thing that came into his mind, yeah, uh, the Father has two wills, just like we do.
that doesn't make any sense. Yeah,
None of it. No, if you deny
it,
that, and again,
so
your book is called
my book is called "Is Jesus the Person of the Son of God?" Uh, is it Jesus? I forget. Oh gosh, I'm forgetting. Is Jesus the person of the Son of God for Oneness Pentecostals? I could still adjust the title, but the basic idea is there. I have a lot of the content already written. I'm just
when
organizing it.
and I'm gonna when it does come out, I'm gonna be promoting it here and on my
Cool,
website, and people can contact me. And also, I'm going to put your information on the description of these two videos. So if anyone wants to get a hold of you, you're doing some fantastic work, especially not exclusively, but especially in the Spanish community. We need apologists to go out there, and I hope we can make it to Colombia. You and I and Matt and just they need positive, they need a positive affirmations of essential doctrines. I went to Nepal. We did a pastor conference a few weeks ago, or actually 2 months ago, and it's a 200 pastors showed up, and you know we taught essential doctrines because that's what they
that's
need.
awesome.
That's what they need. So let us conclude with that. And thank you so much, Luis, for your work,
No
for being
problem.
here. And I'm glad we got to talk on this particular subject, that the Son is a person, contra oneness doctrine, who deny the Son, who deny the Father, who deny God of biblical revelation. The entire content of the biblical revelation is monotheistic Trinitarianism. You can't escape it, and we just have to pray for oneness advocates. And unfortunately, Stephen Ritchie died as a oneness person denying Christ. So, I just challenge all the Christians to pray for oneness advocates, and whether they're Muslims or Jehovah's Witnesses, they're all Unitarian. Pray for the ones who deny Christ by denying the Trinity, by denying that He's the person of the Son, as Scripture says over 200 times. So, with that, thank you again, Luis, and stay tuned for more on this channel. And also look at the description. I'm going to give Luis's information there. So thank you very much. And Luis, any closing thoughts?
I'll just thank you for having me here. It's been a pleasure, and hopefully we could do this again. And
Yes.
yeah, keep Colombia in prayer. Let's see if the Lord opens those doors for me. A lot of stuff going on. I've been very busy, but Just thank you for supporting me too, Ed, for helping me out.
Oh, man. All right,
All right.
we'll see you next time.
All right, guys.